Hey, what's happening, everyone? Pretty excited today. I'm finally starting on a really cool project in the van. So today I'm working on the flooring of the van. So just ran over to Home Depot and picked up some supplies, and I'll show you what I've got so far here. For the flooring here, I got some insulation. This is XPS insulation. It is 1 inch thick, and then on top of that is going to be some 1/2 inch thick plywood. Yeah, so I also grabbed some spar urethane. This is going to be to coat the plywood. That way, in case any water gets under the surface, it'll hopefully be more protected with the spar urethane. Some Super 90 adhesive and great stuff gap filler to go around the edges once everything's down. I also picked up some 1 3/4 inch screws, which is gonna hold everything down. So let's get into it, let's do it. All right, so before I do anything else, I gotta take out this factory rubber mat. This is what I'm gonna use as the template to cut the plywood. In order to do that, there's a little piece of plastic here that I had to remove. It's easy, you just pop the covers off and then undo a few bolts. And then back by the door, there's another plastic cover that I had to take off. And this thing should just slide right out of the van. All right, I just got the rubber mat out of the rear of the van and laid it onto the plywood, and it basically makes a perfect template. So I'm just gonna go ahead and trace along all the edges, and that should make a perfect flooring for the van. I'm just gonna go ahead and cut it out with a jigsaw once I got the lines down. Just a quick change. Instead of making the template on the plywood, I instead decided to make the template on the foam insulation. For one, because it was much easier to cut, and also it's the bottom layer. So if I make any mistakes, it'll be concealed by the top plywood layer. Once all the insulation was cut out and I confirmed everything fit into the van, I removed everything back out again and transferred the template directly onto the plywood. After that, I just cut the plywood exactly the same way as I did the foam insulation and put the plywood down and made sure everything fit with that. I had to go back and forth a few times to make some small trims and small little cuts to make sure the plywood fit into the van correctly. But other than that, it was a very smooth process and it really wasn't that difficult. Okay, so now that I got the insulation and the floor pieces cut, I'm gonna have to figure out a way to secure all that to the floor. So what I'm thinking here is I'm gonna take strips of plywood like this one here and lay them in these grooves. Now this is about 1/4 inch plywood. It's a little bit thinner than the pieces of wood that I used for the floor surface, which was 1/2 inch. The reason I use slightly thinner plywood is because it sits just about level with the grooves here, so it should be a perfect fit there. Once that's there, this will simulate the insulation layer, and this is the top surface. So what I'm gonna do is glue down this bottom strip with some adhesive, and then once that's all glued down, I will set the other layers on top and use these 1 3/4 inch screws, and that'll be just enough to plunge right into that bottom layer and not go into the metal floor, which I don't want to happen. So we'll see if this works. Yeah, I'm just gonna get on there nice and thick because I do not want this to come off, because this is what the screws are gonna be going into. So there's gonna be some pulling up on it when I secure the plywood. So hopefully this works. Now I'm just gonna wait for it to get nice and tacky. You can just feel with your finger. That's pretty tacky. Let's see if this one is yet. Yeah, it's good. So once it's tacky, just gonna throw it on. All right, so I got all the strips laid down here, and that 3M Super 90 adhesive turned out to hold these strips in really, really well. So, as you can see, I might have gone a little overboard with how many I've laid down, but hey, I had the wood, so I just went ahead and did it upright. I made sure I got a lot on the edges, and then the centers and everything like that, so hopefully when I screw the wood down, because the wood has a little bit of a natural curve to it from the pieces I got were just bent, that's all they had. So I need to make sure I can really screw them down the center so it levels everything out right. All right, so now I know everything works, and this is what all the layers look like when they're all secured together. So next I'm gonna take you guys through all the steps I did to get to this point here. So to get these screws the right length, you have to drill into the top surface just a little bit, because if you don't, they won't dig in quite far enough and catch the threads. So you just gotta drill in with this length, it's like about halfway into the top layer, just like that. And then that'll give it just enough to allow the screw to bite in, just like that. So I'm just gonna repeat that along all the different chalk lines, and then that should be good. So you may have noticed that the screws I'm using here are not the same ones which I showed you at the beginning of the video. That's because the wood screws that I initially purchased for this, the threads did not come up high enough to the top of the screw to dig into the top layer. So I took a trip back to Home Depot and I looked in the section where you can buy smaller quantities of screws, and in there I found a 1 3/4 inch screw which the threads came up higher and closer to the top of the screw, and those ended up working great. Once all 3 pieces of plywood were down and all secure, it was time for me to take the Great Stuff foam and go around the crack on the perimeter of the plywood and fill in all those cracks. That way, if water was to get on the vinyl floor, it doesn't seep down in that crack and get into that plywood and get underneath the plywood and cause the wood to rot or the metal to rust out eventually. Alright, so we took a trip back to Home Depot and picked out this vinyl flooring that you see here. The reason we picked this specific one was because it is waterproof, unlike the cheaper version that they had there. Also, we got this rubber mallet, this pry bar thing, and a roll of vinyl tape. Alright, got all the foam done. Now, what I've done here is I just opened up the box of the vinyl planks and I put them each into 4 different stacks with a like or similar patterns to one another. That way I can just grab from one of the piles and I'll have a different piece, so the pattern's not like the same when I have it all laid out. So just varied boards, and it looks nice. So now that I'm ready to start laying the planks down, I just look at the instructions here, and it says to do a 1/4 inch gap along the edge. So to gauge that 1/4 inch gap, I'm just using this ruler here, the width of the ruler, which is a 1/4 inch. I'm just gonna put it around the edge like this. That way I give myself a little gap. So the first thing it says here is to start the insulation in the corner of the room with the tongue facing the wall. Now looking at this diagram, the tongue appears to be this piece right here. So when you go over to the planks, you'll see one has the tongue, which is that, and then the other side is the groove. So I want to have the tongue in the corner of the van where I'm going to start the whole thing, and I'll make my gap and then just go from there. You'll also see that I have this tape around the corner. This is vinyl tape, so I'm just going to go around all the cracks along the edge and then along the cracks here with the vinyl tape. That'll, I guess, help keep water from getting down there, maybe, or also just help stick the vinyl down. So let's get to it. So I'm just going to remove this adhesive from the backing from the adhesive tape. It's easy, it comes right off. Okay, I'm not going to use a spacer because it just sticks to it. So I'm just going to eyeball. Alright, and just like that, the first piece is in place. And now it looks like we have a good starting point to piece together the rest of this puzzle. It gets a little bit more tricky when you get to these sections that stick out a little bit. So I'm going to do the same thing as before, but this time I'm going to lay down my piece of wood, or my vinyl, and I will mark where I need to trim it. Remember, there's supposed to be a 1/4 inch gap anyways, so if it's not 100% perfect, it shouldn't be that big of a deal. So I'm just going to measure out from the wall. So it needs to stick out 2 1/4 inches. So I go a little bit, 2 1/2 inches, 2 1/2. Now I'm just going to make sure it fits. Hopefully it does first try. And yeah, it's perfect. So I made a mistake. So this piece that started out in this front corner, I had to pull that one up. The reason I had to pull that up is because I reread the instructions and it says work from the left corner to the right corner. I guess it's the way the tongues and the grooves work. So I have to start down on that end and that corner if I'm going to start on this side of the van. So I'm going to reposition my stuff down there and just do the same exact thing and work left to right. Alright, now I got my first piece cut out and it fits right into place here, right where it needs to be, 1/4 inch gap. And now what I'm going to do is remove the backing on the vinyl tape and stick the piece into place. So after a lot of trial and error, I kind of figured out the system that worked best for me when putting these vinyl planks together. What I ended up doing for most of them was putting them together by hand with the horizontal edges together first, and then I would slide it up slightly and get the two ends together. At this point you could kind of click them in with your fingers. Once they were clicked together, I took the rubber mallet and then kind of tapped these seams together. Finally, I used this vinyl flooring tool to gain some leverage, and I was able to use the mallet to kind of smash the tiles together in order for them to really lock into place and make sure there was no gap between them. You really don't want any gaps between these planks, for one because it would just look bad, but more importantly, that would allow water to seep through the cracks and it could eventually get to the plywood underneath, causing it to rot out. That's good. So just continue to keep placing the planks into place until eventually it got very close to the wall. Once it was pretty close, there was a small gap around the exterior perimeter, but that gap was inevitably going to be filled with caulk anyway, so it didn't really make a difference. Alright everyone, this is the final product. I hope you like it. I definitely do. I am more than pleased with how it turned out. I love how it looks, and it's much better than anything I could have ever dreamed of doing on this van. It turned out great. You may, however, notice the lack of trim pieces around the door sections. I'm still going to do those, I just haven't figured out exactly what I want to use there yet. So in the meantime, I actually just covered up with some Gorilla Tape in order to prevent water from getting in, but in the future I'm going to add some good trim pieces in there to make it really look professional. Hey, if you guys like this video, make sure you subscribe to the channel because I'm definitely going to be posting more videos of the van build in the future, and I'll catch everyone on the next one. Later.